The phrase friendly footing has been used by One American Daily to describe the first summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba that took place at the White House last Friday. We have more on Mr. Trump's diplomacy and its broader regional implications on Press Perspective today. Hope this workweek is off to a good start for you. You're watching Press Perspective for Monday, February 10th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Today we touch upon what has been shared about, that is, the Trump administration's foreign policy thus far, given the U.S. leaders' most recent summit, this time with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba at the White House last Friday. For more on this, I have Anthony Kuhn with American public broadcaster NPR here in the studio. Anthony, it's been a while since we've had you here. Welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I also have freelance journalist Jack Barton with us. Jack, we haven't had the pleasure of your company in a while. It's great to see you again.
It's great to be back.
Right, Anthony, we'll start with you. Let's begin with details of the most recent summit hosted by U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House, which took place last Friday with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. What were some of your takeaways from that summit?
Well, I think it was an extremely important meeting for a lot of countries, particularly South Korea, to watch. To see how a major Asian ally of the U.S. and a major regional power dealt with the risk of a Trump administration and his America First policies. On another level, there's a certain mundaneness, a sort of routine quality to the meeting, just because the U.S. alliance is a bedrock of Japanese foreign policy, and every Japanese leader has to be seen to be managing the relationship well. And so in that regard, Ishiba did check off a number of boxes. He reassured Trump about the value of the alliance, the fact that Japan has been the biggest direct foreign investor in the U.S. for the past 5 years, and that he's going to commit even more, about $1 trillion, particularly in the auto sector. And he got some of the guarantees he was seeking from President Trump, including that the nuclear umbrella will stay up and open over Japan. It will include the disputed Senkaku, or in Chinese, Diaoyu Islands, which are disputed by the two countries. There are many things which were not resolved. Japan may still be subject to tariffs. There was a lot of discussion of the Nippon Steel proposed acquisition of U.S. steel. The two agreed that it would not, Japan would not be taking an ownership stake in the company, but we don't know exactly what the terms of that deal will be, whether it will be mostly psychological to, buffer the shock of an iconic American company being purchased by a foreign company. Also, people expect Japan to come under pressure for Trump to pay more for the cost of defending the country. That issue was apparently not raised. But the policy direction of the Trump administration is certainly concerning to Japan. The isolationist trend, I think, speaks to their fears of abandonment. And it's a big change from the past 4 years when President Biden was talking about being a global partner with Japan. The U.S. is now sort of retreating from that global role.
For now, though, Anthony, the BBC claims that the Japanese Prime Minister's Trump study sessions, if you will, paid off. Do you agree?
Well, we know that Shigeru Ishiba spent the past weekend huddling with his ministers at his residence to talk about how to establish a personal relationship as a tactic, as a way to take the pressure off Japan. And he seems to, by most accounts, he seems to have acquitted himself pretty respectably. If you look at some of the techniques, some of the things he said, for example, Ishiba commented on a picture of Trump who had just been grazed by a would-be assassin's bullet, and he says, "Oh, I believe you, you thought at the time that you must have been chosen by God, which is why you survived." And Trump himself had said something like this. Also, Ishiba tried to leverage the afterglow, if you will, of the late former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who sort of set the gold standard for managing Trump, stroking his ego, famously deploying golf and sumo wrestling tournaments and Wagyu burgers, which apparently helped to get Japan away from some of the tariffs that Trump had threatened. At the same time, it's not easy, I think, for Ishiba. He describes himself as a defense otaku, a defense nerd. He's not really a sort of backslapping good old boy type of character. If you're expecting him to follow President Yoon's example and croon American Pie, I think you might be sorely disappointed. He did say some things which show his difference. He said, for example, we will not be beefing up our military spending because the U.S. tells us to, but because it's in Japan's interest. And so he's sort of staked out this idea that America will put its interests first, and we will do the same with Japan.
Right. Jack, for global leaders who have yet to engage with Mr. Trump and his threat of tariffs, what cues might they take from Mr. Ishiba's talks with Mr. Trump?
Well, I think that, the key takeaway there is stroke his ego, but also preemptively consider what it is he wants and then prepare to give it to him before he asks. And that is one strategy. It's a strategy we're probably seeing most people try and adopt, not just outside of the US, but even in the US in terms of politics. That tends to be a response that Trump is generating of late. How far does it work, though? So this was a successful meeting, but if we look at Trump threatening, say, Canada with 25% tariffs, and then Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, moving in very quickly with some largely decorative moves, but aimed at giving Trump a win in the public sphere, so naming a sort of an anti-drug czar for the border to stop fentanyl coming in, even though reports show only about 1% of America's fentanyl come in from Canada, but also, setting up some anti-drug task forces, things like this. And then we have the 1 month reprieve, but now we've got these steel and aluminium tariffs, 25% that Trump has declared. And of course, who is that going to hit hardest? Well, that's going to hit Canada. And then so you appease Trump one day, and then, but who knows what's going to come in 1 week's time, and then, so perhaps Mark Carney is right, who's an advisor to Trudeau's government, but the former central bank governor, not just of Canada, but also of Britain, when he said about a week ago that the only way to deal with a bully is to stand up to them. And we know that Trump respects strength. He doesn't respect weakness, but it would require unity amongst leaders. There would have to be some kind of united response, because America is so powerful. Trump is capable of sort of going around and picking off people one at a time if they're not united. Unfortunately, we just seem to be in a period of disunity, particularly those who advocate for liberal democracy don't seem to have much of a voice at the moment. Their camp seems to be in disarray all around the world. So, whether a united front can emerge is very much in doubt. And in the meantime, Trump is going to be rolling out his strategy with sort of shock and awe, outrageous sort of suggestions, just to see what somebody does, to see how far he can rattle them, and maybe get a halfway concession that would have been much beyond what he would have got with a reasonable response, so he can claim a big victory. And yeah, leaders looking at what do we gain from appeasement in the short term? Can we unite for a strong approach? I don't think there's any one way. We're only 3 weeks in. It's going to take a little bit more time.
Right, for sure. Jack, during the joint press conference after his talks with the Japanese Prime Minister, President Trump reiterated his intentions to engage with North Korea. What are your thoughts regarding this upcoming plan?
I think it would be good if it happened, but it would be much, much more difficult than the last time it happened. Now, so many things have changed. Of course, when it happened the first time around, Kim Jong-un was very outward looking. He was trying to bring North Korea kind of back into the world, to get sanctions lifted, much more positive in his outward outlook. But I think after the 2019 Hanoi summit, both sides got an idea of just what a massive disconnect, because there should have been a deal there. What a big disconnect there was between Trump and Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un, of course, wanting sanctions relief before anything happens. So, there is this massive disconnect. It's clear that hasn't fundamentally changed. On top of that, you have a much more inward-looking North Korea, very focused on consolidating internal strength, building up its weapon stockpiles of nuclear-capable missiles. You have a new alliance with Russia, so you've given it a new strategic partner. You have China, clearly very annoyed at the alliance with Russia, but also knowing it can't, completely disengage with the DPRK. So, yeah, Pyongyang playing these different cards, and and just the world is so different that we're in right now. Trump is very different in his second term than the first term. The world, so many things going on, and Trump much more domestically focused, or focused on the countries that border America, focused on the immediate region, not really caring about what's going on so much elsewhere, which may have also been why Japan got a bit of a pass. So yeah, look, it could happen. It'd be great if it did happen. Obviously the terms would have to be now recognizing North Korea as a nuclear state. I think disarmament's completely off the table, but it's going to be so much more difficult now because of all these other elements, and plus Kim Jong-un will know that what Trump really wants is the publicity, a good photo opportunity, and so he's very aware that this is what drives Trump, the imagery rather than the substance, all of which is going to make it very hard.
Right. A growing number of pundits have been echoing Jack's thoughts as well, that if the talks between the US and North Korea do take place this time around, they will be much tougher than they were the last time. I'm assuming, as a correspondent based here in this part of the world, you probably agree as well.
Well, I see different sides of the argument. On one side, I think one thing that's very convincing is people point to the letters that Kim and Trump exchanged. And in some of the final ones, Kim basically felt that he had invested so much of his own personal prestige in this diplomatic efforts with Trump, and when it collapsed, he really felt burned. He felt played. He says, you've basically taken me for a fool here, and he just doesn't, want to go back for that. He's made this strategic shift, to partner with Russia, a deal which he seems to want to seal with blood of North Korean troops fighting in Russia, and also sort of portraying himself and North Korea as a staunch member of an anti-imperialist alliance, a sort of anti-imperialist coalition along with China and Russia and Iran. So it's hard to see him going back. On the other hand, if you look at North Korea's record, often the rhetoric can give way when it suits North Korea's purpose. At some point, the war in Ukraine is going to finish, and then, what will become of Kim Jong-un's leverage when he has to bring his troops home? How much will that blood that's been shed serve to hold that alliance together? Suppose Trump makes good on sort of his indication to recognize North Korea as a de facto nuclear state, and then focus, as some progressives have suggested, focus instead on an arms control deal. Now, the essence of what was discussed in Hanoi in 2019 was giving up a part of the North's nuclear programs in exchange for sanctions relief. And I think what some people take away from North Korea's record on this is that they will keep up the tough rhetoric until they see a really fine opportunity, and then all that rhetoric will fall by the wayside, and they may come back to the table.
Right, I see. Jack, against this backdrop of potential engagement with North Korea, what role do you suppose can South Korea seek to play, especially amid rampant concerns that it might be sidelined from fresh talks between the US and North Korea?
Yeah, well, South Korea has traditionally played such a strong role as a moderator, as a mediator, or a driver of diplomacy. If we look back at the early 2000s, Sunshine Policy and the economic engagement, the diplomatic engagement, the people-to-people, the visits for the families. And that all seems like such a long time ago now. In the future, it will again somehow have to play this important role because it is pivotal to what can be a long-term peace or any long-term deal. But at the moment, it just seems impossible. One, because of the political paralysis in South Korea at the moment, until this criminal court proceeding is wrapped up, until the constitutional court impeachment hearings are wrapped up, and whichever way that goes, either to the return of the president or the stripping of powers, a snap election, 2 more months of political paralysis while that's sorted out, and who knows will win, because we've seen the ruling party come back in the polls. We've seen the opposition party fall away, and whether that's because of the good job the ruling party is doing or a kind of souring of opinion on the opposition, I mean, I won't venture an opinion on that here, but while this is all going on, it's sort of impossible for South Korea to play any meaningful part in a process that may or may not emerge, and of course probably very difficult to play a meaningful part in negotiations with Trump as well, which may serve South Korea well in the short terms and sort of put it on the back burner. But at some point, yeah, a leader needs to emerge who has a vision of what South Korea needs to do and has the diplomatic skills to move that forward, because South Korea is crucial to that diplomacy, and at some point it has to re-enter into that diplomacy. But from where we sit right now, that seems quite a way off, at least a year or so away.
Right. Anthony, with regard to South Korea's bilateral ties with the U.S., how does the return of the Trump administration look to perhaps challenge as well as to consolidate the alliance between Seoul and Washington, do you think?
Well, I think that it seems that there are a lot of policies towards South Korea and the region which have yet to be decided. There are some big differences between different players within the Trump administration. For example, what sort of end-state relationship do they seek with China? Do they want regime change? Do they want some form of coexistence? What do they plan to do about deterring any Chinese move towards Taiwan, and what role would South Korea play in that? Of course, would they want to use South Korea as a base for any military maneuvers centered on Taiwan? That could cause big problems for the U.S. What about the contributions to the cost of stationing U.S. troops here? The U.S. and South Korea tried to get that squared away before Trump came back to power, but is the arrangement immune from President Trump trying to rejigger it? Then, the economy is front and center right now. Today, the Trump administration announced tariffs on steel and aluminum. And of course, South Korea exports a lot of those to the U.S., partially because it's making so many things now, such as cars, in the U.S. and Mexico. And so that has pushed the South Korean trade surplus with the U.S. up. We've just finished 4 years of the Biden administration, in which the U.S. has tried to friendshore or relocate production either to the U.S. or to Mexico to secure supply chains, to rebuild the U.S. industrial base, to win over Democratic voters in swing states. But now this is all in doubt, because President Trump seems to be indicating that he doesn't want to subsidize companies like Samsung and Hyundai to open factories. He'll just say, if you don't move your factories here, you'll be hit with tariffs. Can South Korea say no to this? Do they have anywhere else to move their production? It's a huge question, and the future of what's going to happen to South Korea and other U.S. allies as the competition between the U.S. and China heats up is quite concerning.
Right, again, many questions and so few answers. Jack, Mr. Trump is also scheduled to sit down with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House this week. What should the international community be keeping its eye on?
It's going to be an interesting meeting, because both Modi and Trump are leaders who rely on their charisma a lot to get things done, and they like interpersonal relationships. So it's all about the personal relationship. I think they will probably strike an amicable enough chord. It's unlikely we're going to see the US making big threats to India, but also from what we're hearing from the Indian media, and again, we don't know until the meeting happens, it does seem like Modi might be preparing some preemptive sort of tariff reductions on certain goods coming in from the United States. We've seen some lists in the media, but of course we don't know, what is really on the list or not, if it is there. And also for India to lean in to the deficit discussion. I think India runs up a surplus of about 30 billion a year with its trade with the US, which is India's biggest trading partner, and sort of for Modi to lean in and say, well, yeah, we would like to reduce this down and sort of narrow the gap. So we might be something similar to the meeting that we saw with Japan, but it also has its unique characteristics in the way that Japan is such a strong defense partner, such a big investor in the US. India also has sort of a neutrality arrangement in that it shifts, or its alignments with countries. It's very good at playing nations off against each other. It always has been very good at that. And we've seen India join the Quad because of tensions with China, but now that it's repairing relations with China, of course, the US needs to look in and try and bring India into its orbit. So it's definitely in Trump's interest to have some outreach towards India as well, and ensure that the relations with China aren't mended so much that it begins damaging relations with the United States. So, Trump will be saying, look, you need to buy more of our agriculture, you need to buy more weapons, probably more fighter jets, you need to buy medical equipment, and probably Modi will be saying, yes, we'll do this and we'll reduce some tariffs and we will try and do this. Some of it will be substantive, a lot of it might be tokenistic, but again, I don't think this is going to be earth-shattering news. I might be proven wrong, unlike Trump and Netanyahu meeting and, sort of the crazy we're going to turn Gaza into the Riviera statements coming out of it. I don't think we're going to see something like that. But yeah, again, a big focus on trade, and beneath that, a focus on security as well, particularly in the relationship with China.
Right, and speaking about China, Anthony, China's counter tariffs against the US are in effect as we speak. Do you envision an all-out trade war between the US and China during Trump 2.0?
Well, based on what China has said and done so far, they seem to be taking a fairly, tit-for-tat approach to this. In other words, countermeasures that are commensurate with what the U.S. side does. They have a full toolkit of ways to make the U.S. hurt. That includes export controls on important industrial ingredients, export restrictions on companies that help arm Taiwan. But I think, China seems more confident at this point. They've spent a lot of time working on their economic security, on reducing their vulnerability to U.S. measures, insulating themselves from that and relying on their own internal market. And I think they feel that time is on their side. And if they can just sort of muddle through the next 4 years and let the U.S. undermine itself, they can sit back and reap the rewards when the time comes.
Right. Well, we have been told that China has been better tailoring its tariffs, so to speak. We'll see. All right. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Anthony, as always, thank you very much for your insights today.
My pleasure.
And Jack, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Always a pleasure.
Right. Well, that ends Monday's edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.